You know the feeling. You're standing in an aisle, staring at a row of plastic bottles, mentally calculating the environmental damage of your lunch. For decades, we've been told to monitor our personal carbon footprint. It's the standard metric we use to measure our environmental morality, the tally of miles we drive, the meat we eat, and the plastic we throw away. Then, in 2017, the Carbon Disclosure Project released a report called the Carbon Majors. The data inside disrupted the standard narrative of personal guilt by shifting the focus upstream. This chart shows the findings. The research linked just 100 active fossil fuel producers to 71% of all global industrial greenhouse gas emissions since 1988. If a specific group of 100 corporate and state entities is driving nearly 3/4 of the crisis, why is the average person carrying the crushing moral burden of solving it? To understand the scale of global emissions, we have to look away from the supermarket and out toward industrial extraction. The entities listed in the Carbon Majors report include state-owned giants like Saudi Aramco and Coal India, alongside publicly listed companies like ExxonMobil and Shell. The report focuses on emissions produced since 1988. That's the year the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change was established, officially recognizing human-induced climate change. This line graph shows that instead of slowing down after 1988, extraction accelerated. These 100 producers and their products released more emissions in the 28 years following 1988 than in the entire 237 years prior. Focusing on individual recycling bins overlooks the industrial-scale accountability required to address these numbers. The intense focus on your individual behavior is not a cultural accident. It is the result of a calculated public relations strategy. Fossil fuel companies understood the science of climate change internally as early as the 1960s. After spending decades funding denialist groups, the industry pivoted to a new strategy. In 2004, BP launched an advertising campaign encouraging individuals to measure their impact. They popularized the carbon footprint calculator, effectively shifting the focus onto the consumer. This evolved into modern greenwashing. Campaigns highlight small, eco-friendly initiatives, giving the impression of a transition, while continuing massive investments in oil and gas. This pie chart illustrates the discrepancy. Despite publicized net zero pledges from 12 major European oil companies, only 0.3% of their combined 2022 energy production came from renewable sources. The strategy extends into sports washing. Saudi Aramco's partnership with FIFA for the World Cup is just one example of the billions spent to integrate fossil fuel branding into global culture. These advertising budgets are an orchestrated attempt to shift guilt onto the public and delay urgent climate policy. The pushback against this narrative is moving out of corporate boardrooms and into regulatory battlegrounds. In the UK, the Advertising Standards Authority is actively cracking down on misleading environmental claims across the media. The ASA recently banned advertisements from Shell and HSBC. The regulators ruled that the companies were omitting material information about their ongoing investments in high-emission projects. The momentum reached the international stage when UN Secretary-General Antonio Guterres called out the industry directly. Guterres explicitly demanded that every country enact a global ban on fossil fuel advertising, drawing a parallel to the historic restrictions placed on tobacco ads. Legally treating fossil fuel PR like hazardous tobacco advertising is a step toward breaking corporate narrative control and paving the way for real legislation. If your individual consumer choices are mathematically insignificant compared to the 100 carbon majors, does that mean you are entirely powerless? Not necessarily. Scientist Anders Leverman argues that expecting citizens to do without to solve the crisis actually paralyzes large-scale change. Leverman points out that we don't expect individuals to fix national unemployment through personal choices. We demand that institutions create policies to address it. Individual behavior change and systemic change are interdependent. The choices of the many underpin the social norms that make the policy demands of the few possible. Abandoning the mindset of consumer guilt allows us to redirect that energy toward making uncompromising institutional demands. This requires a shift in identity from passive consumers making isolated sacrifices to active citizens demanding a just transition. High-impact actions are political. That means advocating for strong policies, specifically carbon pricing, strict regulations, and incentives for clean energy. You trigger social tipping points by calling local representatives, attending marches, and demanding accountability legislation that targets industrial oversight. When citizens collectively take to the streets, it builds the groundswell necessary to push politicians and CEOs out of their holding patterns. Redirecting energy toward the 100 carbon majors achieves the scale of reduction that obsessing over a personal footprint never could.